This episode is brought to you by State Farm. From your morning podcast to your afternoon playlist, State Farm knows you personalize your entire day, and that's why State Farm helps you personalize your insurance with the State Farm Personal Price Plan. It offers coverage options that help protect what you care about most at an affordable price just for you. Like a good neighbor, State Farm is there. Prices vary by state. Options selected by customer. Availability and eligibility may vary.
Every cup of Nespresso coffee is an invitation to transform your morning routine into a ritual you can treasure each and every day. Using the Virtuo Pop, a simple touch of the button freshly brews bold aromas and a rich, velvety crema layer for delicious cafe-quality coffee at home. Whether you enjoy your coffee hot or over ice, every sip, every morning is unforgettable. Nothing tastes like Nespresso coffee. Visit Nespresso.com or our app to explore our full range of easy-to-use machines and coffees not found anywhere else.
The Tudors Dynasty Podcast.
Hello and welcome back to the show. I'm your host, Rebecca Larson, and I have a few announcements today. First of all, you may have seen on social media that I've kind of updated my logo and the name to encompass who I've been for the last at least 4 or 5 years, maybe almost 8 years. From now on, I am going to be addressing myself as the Tudors Dynasty and Beyond podcast, because we're not just talking about Tudors. We talk about other time periods as well. So welcome to Tudors Dynasty and Beyond, Dr. Emma.
Hello, I'm so excited. Am I the first one?
You are the first person to be on this new rebranded show.
Well, you know me, I always try to go beyond, so I'm the perfect guest for you. Wow, that was such a dad-mom joke.
That was really, you know, March is a significant time in history because it's Women's History Month, so we want to talk about women in history, but it's also been 10 years since the conception of Tudors Dynasty, since I started. I don't even know how to say it. It was the first time I joined social media, was as Tudors Dynasty in March 2015. And since then, it has only grown into what it is today, 8 years of doing the podcast. Like, I am just so grateful to be celebrating all of this with you today.
Oh, you must have been a baby when you started then.
Yeah, I was like
a long time.
I was like 12. So
yes. I get it. You know. You get your hobbies in the teenage years and this and that. No, but it's really impressive. Congratulations. I mean, you know, now there's podcasts everywhere, but 8 years ago and 10 years ago with all the social media stuff, I mean, you're definitely a pioneer. And I love that you started in Women's History Month. And you are a champion of women's history. And you bring so many women to talk about other women. And it's not that we have anything against the guys. It's just, it's always been a one-sided story, right?
Yeah.
Where the women were like secondary figures, because history was told by men mostly, right? So I'm so glad that you are like, yeah, that's great. Let's tell our side of the story now, right? So what a great way to celebrate. What a great month. I love Women's History Month. I've done in the past things too. I'm remembering 2023, I did a beautiful conference at the American University to honor Women's History Month, just because it's really important to me too, as you know. So, you know me and my Women's History Month things. I love it.
I think one of the things I've realized being a podcaster is anytime I do an episode about a male figure from history, it does not get as many listens as when I do female.
Mm-hmm.
It just shows me the interest that people have, or maybe it's women. Maybe there are more women who are interested in history now and they want to know more about women in history, or maybe it's just some shift in culture that we're experiencing. I don't know what it is. It's interesting.
That's very interesting. I'm not sure why. Maybe because we do have a lot of content on the men. We do have so many books throughout history that have been written about these men. Documentaries, you go 15, 20 years back, and these documentaries are always like centered on the men. And I do think there's been a shift, you know, I'm just things that I'm remembering now with, for example, in the Tudor world with Six the Musical and all these new things and all these new ways to explain not the same, because it's not the same when you include the women, and especially when you talk about the women without being victims, them having agency, right? It's not, oh, Mary Tudor, she was so influenced by her husband Philip. So was Philip, because she was the queen and she was older than him. And let's start to apply common sense too to history, right? So I love the way you intertwine those things, the women's history, but also the common sense history. Come on. Henry VIII was in the center of the universe, as some men still think nowadays that are in power. Well, let's just leave it there. So it's a good way to reflect on that too, you know? Yeah. There's always other agents. Women have always been part of history, a really important part of history. And when we talk about it, we can talk about whatever we want because it's our history too, you know? So thank you, Rebecca.
I love it. Oh, thank you. You're so kind. And today we're talking about women in history and your specialty, the Spanish.
Not again, Rebecca. Yikes, she never stops.
I know. Well, you are to me the expert on the Spanish monarchy and the women in the Spanish monarchy. And that's really what I wanted to chat about today, are these amazing women that, thanks to you, we're now learning about. I really have to say thanks to you, because before you, I didn't really have anybody on the show who was talking about these women and the power that they had. And like you said, the agency that they had. So today, I don't even know, where do you want to start with the Spanish monarchy and the women?
I think we should start with the Spanish monarchy and just explain a little bit what that means. So, because sometimes it's a bit confusing, right? Yeah. I even had to do masters on this to get it right. So the Spanish monarchy is really a compound monarchy. When we say a compound monarchy, it means that there was in this case, everybody knows these two guys, Isabel I of Castile and Fernando II of Aragon, the so-called Catholic monarchs, because the Pope gave them the title of Catholic monarchs, very famous at the beginning of the Renaissance in Spain. And they're famous for many other reasons. They're famous because he was very powerful in Europe. She's famous because she gave money to Christopher Columbus to go and sail west. So that's the beginning of the Spanish monarchy. Why I say it's a compound monarchy, it's because Isabel was the queen of Castile and Fernando was the king of Aragon. Their descendants are king of both kingdoms, but they're not unified yet. So the king of Spain is a king of many kingdoms. Okay, he inherits those through Isabel on one side and Fernando on the other side. So that's why we call it the Spanish monarchy. The reason why it gets to be so big and so important is because it gets because Fernando and Isabel have 4 daughters basically and 1 son. They become very smart at thinking, okay, so what our daughters are going to do is they're going to help our son to become an international figure outside of the Iberian Peninsula, where their kingdoms were, right? So they thought, let's marry our girls to our allies, and that way our influence will extend in Europe. And who are the allies? Well, the allies at this time, the first and foremost is Portugal. Why? Because in the Iberian Peninsula, there is an idea, and there still is, and there has been, and I am in favor of this idea. We're not that different. We're all one united peninsula in many ways and respect, culturally, historically. During the times of the Romans, when this all started, and this place was called Hispania and Lusitania, our historical developments have been very similar. So the monarchs in what today is called Spain always wanted to reinforce that alliance with Portugal and basically just unify the Iberian Peninsula under one monarch, with this idea that they had, right, that their son would inherit the different realms from their inheritance, so from the mom, from the dad, and all that. Because Isabel was a ruling monarch, she was able to give the kingdom to her son, right? It's not like, for example, Elizabeth of York, who didn't become a ruling monarch, And she did have her sons, but she wasn't the one to give them the crown. It was Henry VII who had won the crown in a battle, really, if we think about it. But Isabel and Fernando both were going to give their kingdoms, and Juan, their son, was going to become the king of all of Spain. So their daughters' marriages, the 4 daughters, became a strategy to become these powerful agents in Europe. Portugal was first, but then they thought, who is our biggest enemy? And the biggest enemy of Fernando, of Isabel too, was France. So they decided to isolate France by marrying their other daughters to the heirs of the Empire, the German Empire, which is a very complex, political system too. And we know who else, right? England.
Yes.
Because the youngest, Katherine of Aragon, I'm sure you've heard of this woman before.
Who?
I am going to say, I want to start calling her maybe Katherine of Spain.
I think we should start that.
Yeah, I think Women's History Month is a good start. It's a good time to start vindicating that I believe that this woman has been called Katherine of Aragon for centuries to downplay her role. She was not Katherine of Aragon. She was Katherine of Spain because her mother was Queen of Castile and her father was King of Aragon. When she comes to England, she's called Katherine of Spain in all the sources. Why do we call her Katherine of Aragon? Because her mother died and she continued to be the daughter of the King of Aragon. But really, she's Katherine of Spain. And I think that's the way we should know her. Katherine of Spain goes to England, marries first Prince Arthur. He dies, and then marries Henry VIII because he's already Henry VIII when Catherine marries him, right?
Yeah.
So her sister Juana, who we all know, we did an episode on her. Juana, who inherits the kingdom from her mother, but is imprisoned, remember, because we're very unfair to women in the 16th century. She becomes the mother of the heir of Isabel and Fernando because she is imprisoned. Her son becomes the King of Spain, but he also becomes Holy Roman Emperor. And this is how the Spanish monarchy and the Holy Roman Empire become one. And because of this, Charles V, we all know who Charles V of the House of Habsburg, he needs these women because he is the most powerful man in Christendom, but also his dominions are so vast that he needs administrators. In other places, these administrators would be advisors, would be noblemen, would be clergymen. In the Spanish monarchy, it is decided that it's going to be the women. His sisters, his wife. And this, I think, at the core is, for the Habsburgs and the Trastámaras too, starting with Isabel, blood is above gender. Right? So you're a Habsburg, I don't care if you're a woman. You're my blood, you will defend our house. This is so Game of Thrones. I love it. So this is the way that this is decided in the Spanish monarchy, and it becomes a very successful strategy because then these women are educated since birth to be these diplomatic agents. And, you know, when you educate someone who doesn't have a fair shot otherwise, people usually take that shot and become, you know, very, very smart. And that's why we have examples like Katherine of Spain, but also Mary Tudor. You can like or not Mary the First of England, but you have to admit she was brave. And she was, you have to admit that she wasn't afraid to defend what was hers too, right? Mm-hmm. So this is the kind of idea that starts with Isabel. And this is what the Spanish monarchy is, why it's different to other territories at the time.
From Disney, on March 21st, the musical movie event of the year arrives in theaters.
My name is Snow White. Flawless. Exquisite.
Get tickets now.
Waiting on a wind.
Snow White will have you on your feet.
I think that's a wonderful idea.
And cheering for more.
I was thinking the same thing.
Experience the magical story.
Magic mirror on the wall. Who's the fairest one of all?
Snow White.
Disney's Snow White. Only in theaters March 21st. Rated PG. Parental guidance suggested. Tickets on sale now.
Today at T-Mobile, I'm joined by a special co-anchor.
What up, everybody? It's your boy, Big Snoop Deal Double G.
Snoop, where can people go to find great deals?
Head to T-Mobile.com and get 4 iPhone 16s with Apple Intelligence on us, plus 4 lines for $25.
That's quite a deal, Snoop. And when you switch to T-Mobile, you can save versus the other big guys' comparable plans plus streaming.
Respect. And we up out of here.
See how you can save on wireless and streaming versus the other big guys at T-Mobile.com/switch. Apple Intelligence requires iOS 18.1 or later.
Yeah, it's amazing when you compare the Spanish monarchy to the English monarchy and the difference. It seems like it's almost like modern day where it seems Europe is ahead of the trends versus the US. We're always a little bit slower to catch on to things, like, I don't know, just the freedom of sexuality. Let's use that as an example. Europe versus the US, how different those two are. I don't know why I use that as an example, but that's the only thing that comes to mind.
Because it's pretty important, especially for women too. I agree. I think the idea is we have to remember this is for elite women. And this has got nothing to do, for example, with morality or sexuality, because one of the biggest things that these women in the Spanish monarchy have or try to defend is that they are the most chaste women in Christendom. Why? Because they guarantee legitimacy. And if you are doubting if a woman has been sleeping around or has had other sexual partners, for example, then the heirs, are they legitimate? Are they not? There had been some issues in Castile with this, with Isabella's half brother, who supposedly fathered an infanta that was then, that people thought that wasn't his. So at the core of Isabella's example for these women in the Spanish monarchy was being chaste. So they didn't have a freedom like we think of freedom as women now. They had a higher responsibility than men because their behavior was constantly scrutinized, and because nowadays I want to think that the majority of people think that women and men are equal and have same brain capacities and all that. But back in the day, no. So they had to be better leaders when they became leaders because they were constantly scrutinized and judged. That sounds a bit familiar, though. I think that still happens to women, though, right?
Yeah.
Because, some people think, woman can't be president. She's too emotional. Yeah, right.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Some things definitely have not changed. We do have more agency than we did back in the 16th century, but I think I agree with you that our voice is still being silenced in some situations, but thankfully we have technology and things like podcasts and other things that allow us to say our piece or to be relevant.
When a woman, I think one of the things is the way we see things differently when a woman and a man do them. If a man speaks loud, is sure of himself, assertive, he's the man, he's a leader. Oh, look at, he'll listen to. If a woman does that, she's aggressive. She's, what is she? Is she on those days? Is she? What's wrong with her? Right? I've had a lot of conflict with this because I've always thought of myself as someone assertive, but I didn't have always a chance to be like that. Because whenever I was like that, I would be like, ladies are not like that. You're not behaving like a lady. That's not ladylike. And I'm like, well, maybe I'm not a lady. Maybe I'm just a regular woman.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so true.
There's peasant blood in me.
This is our time. This right now, we are in the 21st century. This is our time to show those women who lived in the 16th century that things did change. They did improve. They might not be 100% where we want them to be, but progress is being made slowly but surely.
And I want to vindicate that I think that despite the fact that this was a long time ago, 500 years ago, 400 years ago, these women, because, and this is at the core of what I study, because they received education, the mindset change of what they could do. I think education is at the core of self-esteem I think education is at the core. Information is power. And I think it's also frustrating, right? When you're educated or when and then you're not given the same shot as a boy, or you're told that's not for girls, that's for boys. It's a double-edged sword, really. But it does give you strength to understand the world around you better. We have to think that, for example, at this time, Catherine of Spain, Catherine of Aragon, for those of you who are still calling her that, she commissioned, well, this is debatable, but Juan Luis Vives was already working for her and had a pension from her, and she inspired all these works. Juan Luis Vives wrote a book on the education of Christian women for Catherine of Aragon, for Catherine of Spain. This is a revolution because before that, all the manuals to train people were for the elite. And this one is called for Christian women. It means a democratization of education. It means because the humanist ideas were already were grounded in these people's minds. And humanist ideas said that if you educate women, they'll become better Christians, therefore better wives. The principle is still a patriarchal principle of marrying and having kids and being the best mother you can. But the idea sets a revolution in the mind. It sets a revolution in the sense of women and men should be educated. And that starts a spark that, cannot be, that's why we know about all these. Why is the 16th century so heavy on all these important women? Because they've been educated. Elizabeth I studied with manuals from Juan Luis Vives. I mean, I've said this, and maybe, this is why sometimes I feel like when I go to England, I'm going to get Brexited really quickly, is that there would not be Elizabeth I without Isabel I of Castile, and without Catherine's work educating Mary Tudor and Mary Tudor. The revolution starts in Castile with Isabel of Castile. And not only because of her daughter becomes Queen of England and all that, it's because she becomes a famous person. She's the most famous person in the 16th century. At the beginning of the century, no one is as famous as she is. No man, no pope, no one. She is the most famous person, really, in the world. And so that starts a revolution in the mindset. Especially in her daughters. Imagine you being the youngest. Mm-hmm. Everybody tells you look like your mom, right? You are like your mom, and your mom is the most famous person in the world. What do you think you're going to turn out like? And what do you think you're going to put up with Henry VIII and all his crap, just like that? No, you're not. I'm sorry, but this is the way I see it. I don't know, Rebecca. What do you think?
Well, I love that. I love that you said that, because I think there is something to be said when you are raised in a home with confidence and you are uplifted, you are going to become a very confident person. I want to talk about her education and her continued education, Catherine of Spain, we're talking about. It's going to take some getting used to. So we all just have to keep practicing.
It's like a Dr. Emma thing. It'll stick. It
will.
We'll get it there.
So we know she had a great education while living in Spain. When she came to England, did she continue that education, and how did she continue it?
She did. She continued that education because she had a secretary who wrote in Latin and in Spanish and would do translations for her and all those things. We also know that she writes a letter. One of the problems with Catherine of Spain or Catherine of Aragon, let's just continue doing both just in case, is that, and I said this before, it's a double-edged sword because she is extremely intelligent. She is also a perfectionist. And she struggles with not being perfect. So she complains at least once to her dad that her English is not good enough when she's already there and she's been there for some time. She's very isolated too. And she doesn't have a lot of money. I mean, she's been raised with all this lavish lifestyle, but as soon as Arthur dies and Isabel dies, Henry VII, we know what he's like, He doesn't like to like spend too much. He likes to keep it in his coffers. And he's not very happy with the fact that Fernando's not sending the money for the marriage. So he's a bit like, yeah, okay. So Catherine is doing what she can, but she very quickly, whenever she has a problem, and this is what education does to you, she solves it herself. She doesn't wait for someone to come and save her, because that's when she decides to become an ambassadress, and she starts acting as ambassadress before her dad appoints her. So when she's writing, for example, she's starting to cipher these letters with a diplomatic cipher. So like, a code, for spies. She was a spy too. When she started to do this and she's writing to her dad's secretary, she says, please don't laugh at me. I've tried my best to do this. This is very difficult. So she is definitely confronting situations with, how can I solve this problem? I have a 6-year-old. That's sometimes you want to fix a problem for your 6-year-old, but it's better to say, hey, how can you fix this? Can we think of a way, and entice them to think for themselves, right? Because that's what you want to do. You want them to have tools for when they have a problem and you're not there. So I think this is what Isabel did very well, not only by educating her, deciding to educate her, but having others educate her, the best humanists in the world. Why? Because these humanists were thinking outside the box already. Her Italian instructor was a very, very knowledgeable man who was thinking about, he ends up in America. This is how much of a pioneer he is. So she does, and she's very quickly doing this. And another thing that I noticed that she does very quickly, she knows how to gain people's favor very quickly, especially her husband, Henry VIII, who becomes obsessed with her as soon as they're married. Why is this not more talked about? Why the first 5 years, when really they built an armada, when he becomes an international monarch, when they have their military successes and all this, why is this not more talked about? Because they become a power couple because of her. She's 23, he's 17. She has international experience, he doesn't. What do you think? He's gonna be the one? But he is the one ruling, of course, but she's the one. And she's in the back, but I don't want people to think that she's in the back trying to like manipulate him. They're constructing something together. That's the way I see it. They're very successful at constructing this together, and she's very helpful to him. And by the time she's regent, she can do a full speech in English that gets everyone crazy. So her English must have gotten really good. We know that she had an accent all her life. And you know why we know this? Because when she's writing things like Hampton Court, she writes it phonetically, and she writes it without an H. And in Spanish, the Spanish people, sometimes when we pronounce in English, we don't pronounce H's. So Anton Court, she would say, right? But I think that accent even gave her a more iconic feel, because they were like, whoa, look, we have a Spanish queen, But she spoke French. She spoke Latin. She spoke Italian, most surely. I was reading the other day that when Erasmus sends his works to Henry, there's letters of him saying, oh yeah, I'll consult with the Queen and Thomas More. She's reading these new books with them. The problem is because of her downfall and all the sources that have been that have disappeared, her role has been underplayed very, very much.
Well, and
but
she was
a force to be reckoned with in the first. Well, in the first, all her reign, but the first 5 years, she transforms England forever.
Well, let's be fair. She was a foreign bride. And, we wonder why people don't talk about the first 5 years. Well, she was a foreigner in the country. So who wants to give her any credit for doing anything?
Right.
I think there's a lot. I want to go back.
But you know what, Rebecca? She is a foreigner, but you talk to anyone, the majority of people appreciate Katherine of Aragon and what she did for England and how she behaved. I think it's more a matter of probably national identity construction in England, and what we always talk about, the sauciness of the 1520s. You can't fight a good saucy story about someone wanting to have sex with Anne Boleyn, That was the case, right? So that just takes over.
Yeah.
Not anymore, because we're here to turn the tide around.
I was just going to say that too, that maybe part of it is that it's the narrative. It's the historical narrative that we've been told. And so Catherine of Aragon or Catherine of Spain is the victim. She is labeled as a victim in history, a victim of Henry VIII, a victim of Anne Boleyn. She's not always seen as this powerful woman that she actually was.
Exactly.
It's amazing.
Exactly. And I mean, she's seen as this like person who's always good and always the majority of the time she was, and all the ambassadors describe her as always having a smile on her face. But she was cunning as cunning gets. She just had one of those personalities that she can control her emotions. So she always waited for a better time and would not just lose her cool that easily. That doesn't mean that she wasn't ruthless when she had to be, because she was, that she wasn't extremely proud, because she was, or that she, for example, I'm thinking of an anecdote when they bring her this document where she's addressed as Princess Dowager, right? The first time. And she has been, and she is very good at staging herself as a housewife. She's just put down her embroidery things, right? And she grabs a quill and she starts scratching out any place where it says Princess Dowager and writes Queen. So, I mean, how cheeky it is that after 10 years of this man telling you you're not the Queen, your last letter you write, you sign it the Queen. I mean, that's that, you know, for all they say that she's also ruthless and this and that and the other. It's just, as you said, the narrative of victim. This happens too with her daughter. Oh, she was this ruthless monarch that was so bad. And excuse me? Have we not read about Henry VIII and the things he did? Have we not read about Elizabeth I and how she was ruthless?
Right.
I don't even get in the debate of Edward. I don't think Edward was a ruler. I don't think a 9-year-old boy is a ruler, to be honest with you. He can have some say in some things, but we are going to compare, wasn't Henry VII, ruthless with his opponents?
Yeah.
Didn't he take his wife's claim to the throne and took it for himself?
Yeah.
Because he could have elevated her. He could have said, I won this crown for you, like Fernando did for Isabel. No, he took it for himself, right? So we just have to we have to get past the Reformation and the Catholic faith and all those things that are so important in that time to see beyond and see that these people are complex, and the women are just as complex as the men.
Speaking of complex, I want to go back to something that you said a little earlier, and I don't want you to get away with saying it without telling me more. You said Catherine was a spy.
Yes, she was a spy. So when I wrote about the languages she spoke, one of the things that surprised me the most when I was studying Catherine is how she learns how to write in cipher. So in cipher means that you're writing these messages in code. You see these encimancas in Valladolid in Spain, and you see these and you don't understand anything. They're just symbols. They're like hieroglyphics, right? So she is sending these messages to her dad and her dad's secretary. Well, if you're sending messages encoded, what are you doing? You're not sending a shopping list, are you? Right?
Yeah, right.
Get me some pomegranates and get me this and that, the other. Also, we know of the time of the divorce, annulment, however you want to call it, Henry's Mildyke crisis, however you prefer to call it. There's lots of accounts where the king is like, the Catherine's doing her thing. That Spanish dude wants to go to Spain. No. They know. I think it is the Duchess of Norfolk once. Because she's isolated, because she's surrounded by spies at the end of her life, but she still has such support from some women, especially. There's incredible things like the time that the Duchess of Norfolk sends her a chicken, and inside this chicken there's an orange, and inside this orange there's a message.
Ooh.
from one of the Italian ambassadors.
That's rather elaborate.
Well, yes, because otherwise they couldn't get this to her. Or, for example, when the spies, Henry VIII's spies are reporting at the end of Catherine's life, she's isolated. She's cooking her food in her own chambers because she thinks she's going to be poisoned. She probably was. Maybe you can ask me about that later. But when she's doing all of this, one of the things that they report back is when she speaks to her doctor, she's speaking in Spanish. We don't know what she's saying. So they're using, for example, the fact that they can speak in a different language to do that. Other times, she uses this to her advantage. When Wolsey arrives one of the times and he starts talking in Latin to her, she's like, hey, we can both speak Latin, I know, but I want everybody to hear and understand what you are going to say to me.
Nice.
Because I want witnesses to this conversation. So she was just very smart in using court etiquette and court politics to take advantage of every situation that she could, because she was always in the, I mean, we have to realize the fact that she is the queen consort and Henry is the king, the ruling king. So she's always going to have the short end of the stick.
Yeah.
The thing is, she does have a lot of support from abroad, and her daughter too. And when we're talking about the women in the Spanish monarchy, because there's really, really powerful women in Europe supporting her, it's more difficult for Henry. So her niece, the Empress Isabel, who is ruling for Charles V in Charles V's absence, who really is the cause that Mary Tudor didn't marry Charles V, because she's the one who ends up marrying Charles, who was betrothed to Mary, future Mary I. She, as soon as they find out about all this marriage thing, she's the one to mobilize everyone in Spain to find the witnesses of her, of her wedding night, the bulls that allowed her the marriage between Catherine, all those things that they have in Spain as proof, because these are international marriage alliances. And she finds all this information. Another example, when Catherine's already died, and Mary of Hungary, so Catherine's niece, is regent in the Netherlands, she sends a lot of memorandum saying, we must help Mary in England. It's their priority to help Mary's cause in England. So I think that's another reason why in 1553, Mary's able to secure the throne, is because the other faction knows, oh, well, now we're dealing again with the Spanish monarchy. Not just the Spanish monarchy, but, Mary of Hungary, who is someone in charge of Charles V's dominions. And so it's this idea that Charles V can invade England if they're not careful. Henry was very worried about this. And it was really Catherine who told Charles not to invade. Did you know that?
No, I didn't.
So Charles sent several formal war threats to England because of the treatment of Catherine and Mary. And it's just, and I see a lot of Catherine's behavior in Mary's behavior later when she pardons her sister, for example, right, Elizabeth. She tells Charles, I could not bring myself to harm my subjects. If you invade, you're going to harm my subjects. And she could just not bring herself to do that, because she knew of the horrible consequences of war. An invasion is the beginning of a war. So she'd rather sacrifice herself than start a war. She just loved English people and her subjects so much because she knew that was her calling. That's what she had been raised to do, is to advance England's prospects, not damage and start a war killing her subjects. That's why people loved her so much too, because she had saved them from an invasion in 1513, and she became against any invasion from Charles, who probably would have invaded if she would have said green light.
Yeah.
So it's always the women as peacemakers too, as deflecting the violence, the high stakes, and all these things.
It's almost like the women were the more rational ones.
Yes.
I'm not
It's
going to go
almost like the women were the rational ones, and nothing has changed.
I'm going to get hate mail now from men telling me I'm sexist or whatever, but
oh, good. You can share my email with them too.
I'll do that.
I'm here for their messages because I don't care. They'll go directly into my
your spam.
Fragile masculinity spam folder.
Oh, you went there, didn't you?
Yeah.
Okay.
This is not me being against men. This is,
Yeah.
I mean, most men agree with me. This is about being ridiculous, about like, it's just, it's time to tell the story in history in the way that women are not, like you said, victimized, and men are thought to be the most intelligent human beings there ever were. And everything that's ever been good in this world has been done by men, and women are just there like, oh, damsel in distress.
Right.
No, it's not. No. And it's okay that 100 years ago people were saying that because that's the way society was. People thought that way. We don't think that way anymore. Men don't think that way anymore.
No.
Either, so
yeah, exactly. Well, we're talking about the victimization a little bit of Katherine of Aragon / Spain. And I want to transition to her sister, Juana, right? Because she's another one who has been unfairly labeled by history. I mean, it's such a tragic story. And you mentioned the thing about the Duchess of Norfolk sending a chicken with an orange inside with a message. Do you know, was anything like that done with Juana?
Over the past several days, 3 females have been found dead.
Looks like someone's going after these girls.
Then they have to know to watch their backs.
Streaming March 13th.
You really want what happened to this woman that happened to you?
Exactly why I need to keep going on this.
Starring Emmy Award winner Amanda Seyfried.
I'm worried about what you're gonna find.
So am I.
Long Bright River, a limited series. Streaming March 13th, only on Peacock.
I was never really a runner. The way I see running is a gift, especially when you have stage 4 cancer. I'm Anne. I'm running the Boston Marathon, presented by Bank of America. I run for Dana-Farber Cancer Institute to give people like me a chance to thrive in life, even with cancer.
Join Bank of America in helping Anne's cause. Give if you can at BofA.com/supportAnne. What would you like the power to do? References to charitable organizations is not an endorsement by Bank of America Corporation. Copyright 2025.
Ooh, we know she was mistreated severely. We know that, I think, like I said, there's a very interesting account of one of the ambassadors of Margaret of Austria in 1514 that he describes Catherine saying, oh, and she's this, and she's the most joyous person, and she's so liberal in the way of liberal, is gracious and all those things. She's so different to her sister in looks and character. So Catherine, as we know, she had strawberry blonde hair, she had blue eyes. Juana looked more like her father, so she had more the Trastámara look, the dark eyes, the dark hair, and all that. So that's the first thing that the ambassador was commenting. The second part is in demeanor. I think that Catherine was very similar to Queen Isabel, who were, like I said, people who control their emotions very well, whereas Juana couldn't. And in this sense, I can relate 100% to Juana, to be honest, because I'm more like that too. But this was something that was not allowed to women. It was allowed for men because then they could be like Henry VIII and Francis I and have a little fight and everybody laughs. They're so funny. They're so cute. Okay.
Look at them wrestling.
Oh, look at Francis winning. Look at Henry humiliated. Look at him again. But after that, in the case of Juana and her outbursts, her bad temper, her whatever you want to call it, her no, this is not the way we're going to do this. We're going to do it the other way. Or no, I'm not going to stand for you sleeping with other women, to her husband, right? This was taken like, wow, careful with this woman. See, it's the perfect example of that perspective.
Yeah.
If it's a man, oh, what a man. He's going to do great in battle. If it's a woman, oh, she's too emotional. She's, so this, I think this was Juana's main problem. And I think when you have a personality like this and you're constantly told off and you constantly to tone it down, to do this, no, you can't do this, you can't do that. And then we have to think at this time, I'm saying Isabel was great raising them. Yeah, great. And then they got punished a lot too. And if you didn't have the right personality, you would get beat up. And like, this is a time where your confessor could beat you up.
Right.
So Juana, when she was in prison in Tordesillas, there are accounts of her being beat up by the people who were there. But the other thing is that at this time, she becomes this shadowy figure that's always there, though, because whenever a baby is born or whenever someone marries someone, they always go and visit the queen, and she does appear in all the documents. In the case of, this is also related to Catherine. Catherine tries to bring her to England. She tries to marry her to Henry VII, and she expresses in her letters that she thinks that she will get better if she's there. And I think what she means is she'll be better if she's with me. She knew her. She had grown up with her. She probably said, well, with my sister, you just need to do this and this,
Yeah.
Just give her space or give her whatever. You just have to, that's what I'm saying. It was the way they could behave was very constrained. So if you were within those parameters like Catherine, you were great. But if you weren't like Juana, then you were a crazy person. Then you were la loca. And that's how she ended. And I do believe that Juana ended up having mental problems because of obviously you mistreated, you beat it up, you're told that you're this great queen, but at the same time, you beat up and put in a prison.
Well, isolated.
By your own father. For example, a figure that I would like to bring up is how we, in the case of Fernando, Fernando, the father, we never judge him too harshly. Oh, well, people sometimes do, but it's like, well, he imprisoned his own daughter. He says things to his other daughter, Catherine, like, I love you the most because you serve me the best. He's a classic manipulator, narcissist manipulator. He cheats on Isabel of Castile many times. He has many natural women, children, and all these things. And when Isabel loses it because he cheats on it, he's like, come on, woman. Come on. You're just exaggerating, So, it's the way society was. So that's why Juana ended up imprisoned, because she didn't behave the way she had to behave. Whether she was crazy or not, I think it's something that happened with time, right? And who is not going to go crazy if you imprison them and beat them up? I mean, come on. Let's be reasonable.
Yeah. I mean, anyone who is isolated from their life for so long is going to...
Gaslighted.
Yeah. Yes. It's damaging to a person's psyche to be put into a situation like that. So it's no wonder. If she had a breakdown at the end, it's no surprise to me.
Well, the thing is, her husband, when they meet, he's very, very, very enthusiastic about this marriage when he meets her. He really likes her. Let's say it that way. And they have very passionate love affair at the beginning and all. That's what they say, right? But there comes a point where she becomes Queen of Castile, and he's just not used to a ruling queen. So he wants to take over, and he wants her to sign her rights over to him. And for all that she loves him, and she's having all these babies, and can't live without her husband, she's like, excuse me? No. That would be the ultimate. So you see how they say she was mad, but there's many things that she did where she was true to her Trastámara, the way she'd been raised, right? And she said, no. What do you think that Philip does? He puts her in a room because she doesn't want to sign her rights over. He puts her in a room, and he goes to the room upstairs with his new girl, and they have sex all night. Oh, so Hannah can listen to that.
Gosh, that's so terrible. Just
do you have underage people listening to this? I hope not. Stop listening, children.
Stop listening. The whole Juana story is heartbreaking, and you know, what happened to her and what happened to her sister Catherine. It's so sad. I want to know, of the children of Isabella and Ferdinand, who do you think was the most successful? And I feel like you're going to say Catherine right away. So maybe I should eliminate Catherine and say of the other daughters.
Ah.
Of the other daughters. I don't know if that's even fair to say. Maybe Catherine was the most successful.
She was the most successful. I would say her eldest daughter, Isabel. She's probably the least known. And Maria was very successful in the sense that she had 10 children. And she died after having her 10th child. And she was very loved in Portugal, too. But I think Isabel, the eldest, she was the only one for 8 years until her brother was born. So she was heiress during a time of war. She was a baby and a disappointment because she was a firstborn and she was a girl. But nevertheless, she had to play her role. So they sent her to Portugal as a captive to secure the end of the war. So she grows up there. She ends up marrying the heir to the Portuguese throne, and it's very similar to the what happens to Otho. He dies 5 months later because he falls off his horse. She's devastated because they liked each other and all these things. She goes back to Castile and she doesn't want to marry again. But they forced her really to marry again in the end. So it's successful in terms of, I don't think any of them were successful, but in terms of endurance and showing that they are committed to their parents' project, Isabel, the eldest one, is certainly, yeah.
Okay.
This is a shame that we don't have an English biography. The Spanish biography is written by one of my best friends, Dr. Ruth Martinez Alcorlo. So if any of you want to read that biography, it should be translated into English. She's got it. Imagine growing up during a wartime, and then, you know, being sent to the enemy as a token, because a peace token, and growing up like that, you know, and knowing that, and then finally she dies after having a baby. Yikes.
Well, let's shift it to legacy, because we know Katherine of Spain, her legacy was really her daughter, right? So when we look at the other siblings, who had the strongest legacy? Was it Maria because she had so many children, or was it one of the others?
Maria in a way, but Juana. Juana has all of Juana's children become queens and emperors. So she has 4 daughters that become queens and regents. So we've talked about Mary of Hungary. We've talked about, and then her 2 sons become emperors. And then Charles becomes king of Spain. So in terms of the success in the project that Isabel and Fernando start, the most successful is Juana, but depends how you view it. Because in the sense of Juana, yes, all her children are queens and 2 emperors and that. Maria has 10 children. She educates them all very well. And that's Empress Isabel, for example, that becomes regent in Spain and marries her cousin, Charles, all that. But in England, it changes history forever, because I will say again, without Catherine's role educating Mary, and without Mary being the only child and being a woman, we wouldn't have Elizabeth I. I want people to understand this clearly. And maybe we wouldn't have Queen Victoria, and maybe we wouldn't have Elizabeth. We would have other women because, you know, time and history would have changed that. But the history of England and Great Britain would have been very different without Mary Tudor. There's no, you can like her or not, I'll say it again, but without her and her pioneering reign, who knows if it would have been in the 18th century, if it would have been in the 19th century, you know? So I think, and look at how iconic female rulers have been since in Great Britain.
Yeah.
You know, those polls that they bring out now, who is the most famous? Well, it's all between the ladies. It's either Elizabeth II, Victoria, Elizabeth I.
Yeah.
Those are the most famous, and good old Henry VIII and all that. But who do you think is the most famous British monarch of all time?
Of all time. So that's difficult because, of course,
Pick five. Let's do top five.
Top 5 female monarchs?
No, top 5 British monarchs.
Oh, gosh. Well, would we put Elizabeth II as number 1? She ruled the longest.
And she's the most iconic person in the 20th century, in my view.
Yeah. And then I don't know what I would do with Victoria and Elizabeth I and Mary I, because I feel like Victoria reigned a long time, but I don't know enough about her to know her impact on England. So maybe I'd put Elizabeth I as second. Oh, and oh gosh.
It's part of the Victorian era?
Yes. Well,
Well, that was named after her.
I know. I feel top 5 monarchs. I want to put all the women up there. I want to put Henry.
I think women, once they get to power and if they have long reigns, they become agents of changing the way that they do think differently on war, on peace, and all those things. And I think that's why it's more prosperous when women were back in the day. Nowadays, it's a different story, but back in the day, I think that was the case, right? If finally a woman was accepted and she ruled for a long time, this is also something that we have to think about. It's not the same to rule 5 years and to rule 45 years. The women have a different impact in that way, I think, yes. And I would say Victoria is in the top 5 British monarchs of all time.
Okay. So how do you feel about putting Henry VII up there because he brought peace?
Henry the Seventh?
I
would say William the Conqueror.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. All right.
Because he starts everything in many ways and respects.
Yeah.
It's difficult, isn't it? It's not that easy.
I feel like I can't decide right now. I'm curious what other people think. So if you're listening to this, I want to know who your top 5 British monarchs are.
I think we should do a poll and we'll see more than 2, more than 3 women up there. Because anyone you talk to, I mean, the Elizabethan era, the Victorian era, and then Elizabeth II is just a beloved character from the 20th century. We've all grown up with her, and she was just, she was part of the history of the 20th century, and just, it's just you couldn't imagine your life without a queen in England, right? It's just the way we all were for such a long time. After she passed away, I still, even time after, I would still think, when I thought of England, I would still think of the Queen of England, right?
Yeah.
It's kind of weird especially because I had to change all my copyrights and all my PowerPoints because I study the British Royal Collection too. And that's a private collection owned by the monarchs. So I think that's why I have that connection to Elizabeth II too, because I've studied her collection so much. And because I've studied that collection so much, I have realized how important women's contributions have been. In that sense, I would like to, and for my part, dedicate this talk today to a woman who has been very influential in my life, my PhD advisor and my mentor, Noelia Garcia Perez. She is really the person who taught me to take my passion for women's history into a real career, into trying to explain that this is beyond just feminism. It's about social justice. It's about being fair to women and to women that came before us, and even the men, because we study things like, for example, the fact that Henry VIII was influenced by women all his life. We just have to see how obsessed he is with women, So I think I wanted to dedicate the episode to her too, because she has started a whole movement in Spain about this, and in the Prado Museum with the female perspective. And you should see the audience, the response of the audience to this. People are thirsty for this because men and women, because it's wonderful to know that women have always been so linked to beautiful things. Like let's build culture, let's build art, let's get, that's what I think. That's why this project at the Prado Museum is being so successful. People are, it makes sense to them because they've known all these portraits and all these paintings for a long time. And now to be presented with all this information that women have been so important in the foundation of our most important museum in Spain, it brings everyone a sense of pride that is just beautiful to watch. So congratulations to her. And by the way, a little news on that. She's becoming a professor, the making her a professor.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Let's talk about how that's different, because in the US, professor and having your PhD are a little bit different than they are across the pond. So PhD is fantastic, but professor is the level above, right?
Well, a professorship is an academic post. So a PhD is a title you earn by carrying out a research that going through a viva with a panel and all that, and you become a doctor, a PhD, right?
Yeah.
And you can work in any type of work. I mean, a lot of PhD people with PhDs work in academia. And then in the academic world, you have people who teach in higher education in colleges and universities. And a professor really is the highest you can go. And it's a long process because you have to teach for many years. You have to publish many good articles. You have to have a very successful trajectory because they don't make everyone a professor, right? Mm-hmm. So this is just a recognition to her tireless work, not just for the study of women in the past, but she's the best at empowering not just women but her students. And I think this is because she is a woman. She is so good at recognizing your potential and just letting you flourish on your own, but always be there. She's very good at getting you enthusiastic about the things because she's enthusiastic about what she does, right? And then she's very loving and caring, so what can I say? She's my mentor. She's amazing. And I'm so happy for her. Congratulations, Noelia. I can't think of a better month for you to become Professor Noelia Garcia Perez than Women's History Month. This project that she has in the Prado is just going to grow bigger and bigger, in the Tudors dynasty and beyond. We're all about it, right?
That's right.
And we've had, other people involved in that. Like we had Alejandro Vergara come and talk to us. He's just published now a book on a female artist. This is how cool the Prado Museum is in that sense, right? We have so much to learn about women and art in that museum, and people like Noelia Garcia Perez or Alejandro's new book on Clara Peters that will be published, and we'll talk about it. He'll come and talk to us in the podcast about it. This is how amazing this institution is. I'm sure that other museums will follow along, but let's remember that it was the Prado who did it first. They did it first. That's the thing. It's Women's History Month. I feel empowered to say all the truths.
Well, I want to thank you, Dr. Emma, for championing. Wow, I can't talk. Championing. I can't. Yeah, you know what I'm trying to say. Women in history. Thank you for being that person who is showcasing and highlighting these women and what they've done for future women like us. So thank you so much for coming on today for Women's History Month and talking about women in the Spanish monarchy. And we're going to start a trend now with the hashtag Katherine of Spain. So anytime we talk about Katherine of Aragon, let's use Katherine of Spain.
Thank you, Rebecca. Well, thank you for giving your platform always for these causes and this very just cause. Very needed in our current world. So thank you so much, Rebecca. And thank you for bringing me back to the podcast. I'm always happy to come here. You know that.
Thank you.
Have a great day, guys.
And that concludes another episode of the Tudors Dynasty podcast. Thank you so much for listening. If you love the show and would like to show your support, consider becoming a patron over on Patreon. That's patreon.com/tutorsdynasty. Over there, you'll get commercial-free episodes, early access, and some patron-exclusive content as well. If you would prefer to show your support in another way, head on over to my website, tutorsdynasty.com, and click on the shop to see some of the new merchandise that I have available. Thank you so much for listening. Until next time.
The Tudors Dynasty Podcast.